Yes, that's good. That's working. The second part of our event this evening is the pastoral question time, where we'll be putting your questions to an invited panel of pastoral experts from, indeed, around the globe. I will introduce the panel at the start of the question time. But first, it's a great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Shaun McInerney, who is the School Leadership and Strategy Lead at the University of Worcester. And Shaun has led in 5 startup schools in England and India. He was a senior leader in a successful large inner city school in Liverpool and was the founding principal and after that executive principal of the studio in Liverpool from its inception in 2013 to 2019. Ofsted rated the studio's personal development as outstanding and noted their success in turning around the lives of young people. In 2019, Shaun returned to International Sixth Form College, UWC Atlantic, as Director of Curriculum Innovation, pioneering their Changemaker curriculum. Shaun continues to work at a system level with the Edge Foundation and international NGO Ashoka, developing an ecosystem to help schools respond and meet the needs of young people in a rapidly changing world. He has developed new capabilities for a New World programme, which is supporting principals and system leaders in Greater Manchester to develop their leadership and strategy to enable young people gain fair access to the economic opportunities in their region. Huge welcome to Shaun.
Thank you, Phil. Really appreciate that warm and generous welcome. And hello to all of you, and thanks for inviting me to do this, Phil. If you're expecting a kind of list of Ofsted criteria of outstanding personal development, then I'm afraid you come to the wrong person. But what we will do is take a little journey actually into personal development as it lives in kind of ourselves and trying to induce that in students and at a system level. So it's great to be here. Hopefully we'll get some interaction and we'll get you involved in this. I appreciate some of you might be cooking dinner and doing all sorts of things and traveling places, and that's fine too. But let's kind of try and learn together really over the next half an hour. I wanted to start by sort of saying that photo on the bottom right, that's probably all you need to know about my career. It's like trying to keep the fun in the schools that I was working in and listening to students actually in order to try and work out their needs. That photo was taken during a STEAMco launch at the school that I led that Phil referred to in Liverpool called the Studio. And I think that gave me a bit of an insight actually into what young people need, because it was a startup school and we were trying to prize young people away from their existing settings, which can be really challenging unless you're really astute and carefully responding to what they need from the next phase in their education. So that's really been the hallmark of my career. I'm feeling a weight of responsibility tonight. Because you've all had busy days, and it's really great to see so many of you here. I think if we're doing this learning well, then by the end of this session, I'm just hoping that you'll feel a little bit more aware of your own capabilities and those capabilities that unlock potential in students, and we'll say a little bit more about that. I want to give you some space to reflect on your own strengths and your own capacities. Because it's really outstanding personal development for young people, and children starts with us. And that's kind of an enduring message of this evening. And the framework that Phil referred to around self-schooling system that we developed with school principals in Manchester, it really brings the system perspective into the frame of thinking. And I want to do that through this presentation this evening, because I just think that in a world of complexity, then viewing the world from a systems level is one of the most important things that we can be doing. And I'll say a bit more about that later. So in terms of my own career, and in terms of this presentation, I do kind of like to cover a lot of ground. So hold tight and do put things in the chat. And if you want to slow down, put it in the chat, and let's kind of make this as interactive as possible. As you can see there, my career has been really varied. It's been, in the further education sector, the sixth form private sector, international schools. I've worked for an NGO, 2 NGOs actually in India, setting up schools. But I think the the mainstay of my practice has been in inner city Liverpool, where I led in 2 different schools, and I was the principal and executive principal in one of those. And that was really a really challenging area, and I think it gave me an insight into what particularly working class kids need. And I'd like to kind of us to consider that as we walk through this presentation. And I'd like to start with one of those kids, actually, start with a little story. This is Adam. And, as we think about unlocking potential, unlocking potential of students, and then unlocking potential of ourselves, and then of the wider system, I think his story kind of serves as a good reminder of the impact that we can have. And Adam was in the first cohort of the studio, and one fine morning, he just kind of came bursting into my office, and he said, like, Shaun, and we're on first name terms, which I think is significant. But he said, Shaun, I've just had a real insight. I want to do something at the studio, and I want you to help me. So I invited him in, and we had a chat. And what transpired is that he wanted to invite his hero to the studio, who was an MIT professor, a guy called Richard Stallman. And that's no kind of regular request for a year 10 kid, right? But he'd had his curiosity awakened, really, through some of the work that we were doing together at the school. And my response was, great, how can we support you? We put a team around him, and there he is on one of those photos, hosting this MIT professor who was the founder of the kind of global free software movement. And he hosted him for the tech community of Liverpool. One thing led to another. He gained a platform for speaking and advocacy for young people's data freedom. He went to the House of Lords. And like 2 years later, he's flown to LA to be recognised as one of the 25 most prominent young digital leaders globally by the Internet Society. Now, that might have happened to Adam if he'd been in a school that wasn't deeply listening to the needs of young people and what can unlock their potential. But it was really an expression also of the capacities that he was growing as he was doing that work, and the conditions that we put around him, really, that colleagues put around him in order to make that happen. And I was so kind of impressed with his journey. He's now actually a governor at the studio, and he runs his own software company. He's really kind of fulfilled his potential, if that's what we're talking about this evening. So it's a good place to start. And I interviewed him, actually, because I really wanted to discern what it was that made that possible for him, and what were the conditions around it that we were maybe intentionally or unintentionally creating as a school. And you can see some of them there. He was really passionate, and that was the thing. He was able to unlock his passion, and he was able to develop communication skills and confidence to speak to adults about his passion. And I think particularly with working class kids in the UK, if you ask them what they really want, in my experience, they want the confidence to be able to talk to anyone. And Adam was no exception to that. And through the curriculum flexibility we had as a studio school, we were able to open up opportunities like that. And so that kind of got me thinking about, what are those capacities that he needed, and what were the conditions that might unlock young people's potential. And the conditions that we put around young people are really kind of the determining factor here, I think. In Adam's case, it was curriculum, and having kind of half a day to a day a week to develop a project that he knew was close to his heart, that was really kind of, allowing him to open up and pursue his deeper sense of purpose around data freedom, to put mentors around him to build the kind of social capital that young people need, and to honour that sort of support network that young people need, to create coaching within the school so that young people had at the time a confidential space to express their sort of deepest needs and fears, actually, to their coach, that then we could aggregate and provide through provision. And it was an unusual school because it was a new school, but it was a state school. It just used its freedom and autonomy, maybe in a slightly different way. But that kind of framing of what the capacities that young people need and what the conditions is one that we'll come back to. And I know there's some academics in the room, and if you're kind of curious about the kind of philosophical or academic conceptual underpinning for this piece of work, I'm very much influenced by the work of Amartya Sen and the capabilities approach. I think it's very underplayed in education globally, actually, particularly in the UK. And what it signals and why it's important is that it signals a shift from resources like qualifications to a success criteria for education that revolves around the freedoms that education opens up for young people. You know, the choice set that they're able to access and live into as a result of the education they've had. And that's a really significant reframe, I think, for the topic that we've got tonight. So, education's full of false dichotomies, isn't it? You know, we've got pastoral and academic, traditional and progressive, and so on. And I think one of the key things we need to move beyond is those false dichotomies, particularly when it comes to pastoral education. You know, pastoral education, and we all know this, don't we, through the work that we do, pastoral education and academic achievement are two halves of the same walnut. And I think what connects them actually is relationships. And so, you know, relationships really are so crucial to the way in which we can unpack the potential of young people. And I'd just like to kind of introduce you to a little bit of research around this. I think the interesting research is coming from the US, actually, around this. Our research framing in the UK is so narrow that it doesn't really allow a lot of the longitudinal studies to filter into policy and practice. But the Search Institute in Minneapolis in the US is doing some really, really interesting work. And that work revolves around the idea of developmental relationships. So developmental relationships are really close connections through which young people can discover who they are. So there's an identity aspect. They can cultivate abilities to shape their own lives, and they can learn how to engage with and contribute to the world around them. So it's really kind of the kind of relationships that unlock potential. So they're worth delving into a little bit. And when you look at the evidence of the Search Institute, some really interesting things that come out of it. They've done a longitudinal study over the last 10 years with 25,000 young people across the US who are following their assets-based programs. And what they've done is identify 40 assets that correlate positive academic outcome and the social outcomes. So you can see there on the graph on the right, the number of these developmental assets that a young person has is really determines the number of high-risk behaviours that they exhibit. And there seems to be kind of a causal, if not just a correlational relationship here, that their further research is trying to unpack. And if we look at that, then I think it's an opportunity to reflect on the quality of the relationships, what we as adults are bringing to those relationships, and in terms of the conditions actually in schools, what conditions are we creating as school leaders in order to have really quality relationships that do things like expressing care, which is really important, challenging growth of young people, providing this really important asset that young people need. And one of the assets that Adam had in abundance was expanding opportunities. So having conditions and people around young people who can expand their opportunities. And I wanted to kind of index on a couple of those assets, particularly around expanding opportunities and building up a young person's social capital. It's not always possible, if you're in a resource-poor community, to develop the kind of social connections that can really help young people to expand their network base. It's a real challenge. And I think some of the most interesting work in this area of personal development for young people is happening around social capital, and the Search Institute are involved in that, amongst others. And just for those of you who might not be familiar with the term, social capital is a term that's used to describe kind of the latent resources in a system. There's so many kind of things, resources that are unlocked through relationships. Me doing this presentation is a good example of that. Matt kindly introduced me to Phil. Phil asked me to do this. Here I am sharing this with you. There's reciprocal benefit from this, but resource poor young people don't really struggle to build the social capital networks that enable them to access opportunities that will and could potentially allow them to break through glass ceilings of disadvantage. And it's really, again, this is really underplayed in the English system, and I think that it is deserving of attention, because what, for example, Julia Friedland Fisher's work says at the Christensen Institute is that it's not just what you know, it's not just the resources, and not just the qualifications, it's who you know that opens up future social mobility. And we know that from employment research that shows that, sort of depending on the study, between 50 and 70% of people get jobs from who they know in different sectors. So this is really, really crucial, but it's also quite a challenge for schools unless they think in a different way. So in Liverpool, for example, right in the middle of Anfield and Everton, really, really challenging areas where the social capital was very weak. I forged a link with an international school in South Wales. They were keen to do some partnership work that led to some scholarships, and we've had students from the school go down there as fully paid sixth form students. And it's, that's just a game changer, actually, that kind of sharing power and expanding opportunities, allowing them to bridge into new experience, to link across different social groups, just enables them to take that social mobility leap that we want all young people to be able to take. So that's it for students, and I'd like to kind of think now about ourselves. What is it about ourselves that we can harness in order to unlock the potential of young people? And actually, that starts with us thinking carefully about how we grow and develop. It's kind of interesting that in schools we put so much attention on the growth and development and learning of young people. We often sort of forget that maturity journey that adults are on as well. And the work of Robert Keegan is really influential in this area, and it's opening up new kind of fields of practice potentially in leadership development and in professional learning that I think are really significant for outstanding personal development for young people. Because if we can become more mature and sophisticated in the way that we think as adults, then of course we can shape young people's experience in a new way. And I'd just like to kind of share this slide with you from Robert Keegan's work. He has charted the growth and maturity development longitudinally of lots of adults over decades, and his conclusions are that most of us fit into two categories actually. Most of us actually follow the rules. We're conditioned by the environment that we're in. We don't question things too much, and some of us are maybe a bit more identity driven. We're more concerned with our own autonomy and the freedom and choices that we have. So we break out of that socialized mind paradigm, and we're more about self-authoring our experience in relation to relationships and employment and everything else. And very few of us actually have the nuanced mindset of a self-transforming mind, about 1% of us, and that's the ability to kind of hold lots of multiple contradictions in our mind without being phased at the same time. The interesting thing is that it's not a category, it's not a kind of typology, and we can fall in and back and up and down these different categories according to the context that we're in. But also it's a nested loop. So if we move from the socialized mind to the self-authoring mind, we still keep that socialized mind with us sometimes. And that's really significant, I think, because we wouldn't want this to become a kind of label that we put on each other. It's more a guide for how we can learn, grow, and mature, and also kind of scaffold the development of more sophisticated mindsets and more sophisticated ways of being that the world is actually demanding of us right now as it becomes more complex and more and speeds up. So I wanted to share that with you partly because it keys into a piece of work I've done with Ashoka, this NGO that Phil referred to, about this very thing. How do we unlock the potential of adults who are developing others, and how do we get the best out of ourselves and others in the teams that we're working for? So I just wanted to kind of test you, actually, to test the kind of the room. Like, what do you think we need to develop in order to be our best? What are those capacities that you think are really, really key? And just kind of like take a second to put a couple in the chat there. If you are working at your best, what are you growing in yourself? I'll just give you like 10 seconds to do that, and it enables me to have a little break as well. Just put those in the chat. Confidence and self-belief, amazing. Psychological safety, lovely. Confidence, compassion, thanks, Karen. Confidence, self-awareness, interesting. Developing an understanding of our own complex identity, absolutely. Values, ego maturity, beautiful. Lovely. Self-reflection, adjustment, freedom to innovate. Excellent. Lovely. Openness, open to new ideas. And does that change at all if you think about the cultural conditions, that help you to grow and develop? I mean, some of them have been mentioned already, particularly psychological safety and so on. Cultural conditions are kind of interesting, aren't they? Because we sometimes find it difficult to discern them. Everyone's heard the story of the two fish who are swimming along in the ocean, and an elder fish swims past them and says, "Oh, nice water." And they look at one another and say, "What's water?" We can't see what we're in. But, just kind of take a second to put those cultural conditions in the chat. What are they? What helps you grow and develop? So kindness, empathy, other people's support, freedom to fail, great. Coaching, trust, autonomy, supported environment, understanding, beautiful. Equity, time to reflect, nice. Space to be, feeling safe. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much for those. It's so interesting. Clear values that are shared, brilliant. It's so interesting. This little piece of work from that I did with Ashoka, I wanted to kind of share with you because it just keys into so much that's been put in the chat already. And just to step back from that a second, Ashoka are a kind of international NGO, really. They're in the same space as kind of Oxfam and the others, but they don't build stuff. What they do is encourage people to learn and grow into taking action that's more equitable and sustainable. And they've got a network of sort of 4,000 social innovators across 90 different countries. And from that network, they've kind of discerned quite a lot about how systems shift and change, and how the role of social innovators in that. And the piece of work that they asked me to do with a small team that we worked with is to try and think about how those insights might be of use to people in the education system and in other sectors who are seeking to develop the potential of others. And that could be, young people, it could be the teams that we work in, and it could be across all different sectors. Ashoka are kind of famous, I guess, for developing what's the field of social innovation and social entrepreneurship. And they've turned their attention to kind of change making now. So they're really interested in what unlocks the potential of change makers. What is it that enables people to become change makers? And what's really interesting, and it'll be no surprise to you, is when we interviewed people, we surfaced some inner capacities and some external conditions. And the inner capacities are exactly many of the ones that you've put in the chat already. You know, awareness, meaning making. You know, the ability to make sense of increasingly complex environments, self-permission, and responsibility. So, stepping into solve social problems or solve things around us because actually we feel like it's our responsibility, but also because we feel psychologically safe to do that. So as we spoke to people and we said, okay, well, how do you develop these in others, and what are the conditions you put around that process? Now, they said receptivity. You know, cultures of receptivity are absolutely key. Reflection and deep reflection is really important. Both at the level of self and at the level of setting and context as well. And that's really important so that people can discern really what is going on here and who am I and how am I showing up in that. And so that's, you know, there's really interesting pairings there. You know, belonging, psychological safety, unlocking our ability for self-permission and emergence, and tolerating the fact that, as one of you put in the chat, you know, things are complex and we need to be able to fail in a safe way. That's really important. That's a product of holding a culture where things are emerging as opposed to very fixed and mindsets around that as well. So that's where we got to with that initial piece of research. And then, you know, we didn't want to fall into the same trap that a lot of research does in this field, which tells you what to do, but not how to do it. And the next phase of this was thinking about the practices that unlock potential. So what's the how around this? You know, what do we need to practice so that we grow and develop? And this is, you know, very, very emergent itself. You know, we finished this last summer. It's out on this website, the togethernesspractice.org. We're inviting people to really delve into that, get into it, and maybe use some of the practices and insights on there in your own settings and feedback into this process, because we don't know how this will land in different sectors in different countries with different priorities. So please do kind of have a look at that. And what we discerned from the people we spoke with is that there are four buckets really of practices that are really important to the process of developing potential, and that is the ability to pause, you know, to step back, to stop, you know, to get off the hamster wheel. And, you know, that's really, really important to create space for ourselves and also within ourselves. And so it's no coincidence that this is kind of a triple Mobius. That space that we're opening up in the middle of the practices is the space for us to relate to ourselves and to others. So that's really kind of the relational field. And it's through the relational field that we grow into kind of deeper understandings of ourselves that enables our potential to ripen. But that doesn't happen unless we're trusting. And the cultures we put around trust, building that intentionally, are really important. And actually what we also discovered is that, you know, people don't become whole and unlock their potential in isolation. It's only in community. It's actually only with and through others that we can unlock our potential, which is a really important insight, because it's the work we do together and our reflection on the work that we do together that underpins the progress and the growth that we can make. So I'm really kind of curious. Please feel free to throw anything in the chat about how that lands for you, and please do kind of jump on these sites at some point and get involved in that. I'd like to kind of, by way of example, if we've got enough time, I think we have, by way of example of this, I'd like to kind of just guide you through a kind of 5-minute process that allows us to explore our own capacities and our own strengths. So if you've got a piece of paper and a pen handy, then just kind of get yourself in a comfortable position and just follow this process through with me. Okay, so ideally get a blank sheet of paper. So, you know, just a sheet of A4. Just get yourself a sheet of A4 and get a pen or a pencil, I'm going to ask you to write one word at the end of it in large letters on the other side of the paper, or on the same side. So just be prepared for that. So if you're ready and if you're willing, just draw a line, that represents your experience of your journey through life from around the time you were born until now. Okay, and as you do this, you might consider moments of key significance for you, personal thresholds, big moves, big decisions that you made. Your line might look like that. It might look a bit different, but just take a few minutes. Just take a few minutes to do that. Yeah, just think about those peaks, those troughs, those squiggles, the smooth bits, and just take, in your own time, a few minutes to just draw your line from birth until now. Still see, yeah, most people have finished drawing, I think. Nice. We had heads down, we've got heads up. And just reflecting on that, just mark one spot on it. One spot when you felt, the most brilliant that you could be, the most true, whole, powerful version of yourself. Just draw one spot on that and just reflect on that for yourself, just in your own world for a moment. Just reflect on that beautiful time. Why does it stand out? What was going on within you, around you? Okay, and then just on your sheet of paper, just write one word on the full sheet that describes what it was at that moment that enabled you to feel that way. What capacity, what were you drawing on? What resources were you sourcing and using? And just write that in big letters. And when you've done that, just hold it up to the screen if you're willing. Just hold it up so that everyone can have a little look through. Amazing. Belief, values, beautiful. Nice. Contentment, love. Just hold it up really clear so that, yeah, great. Confidence, is that confidence? Roisin, is that confidence? Yeah, cool, Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Lovely. Lovely. You know, when we talk about conditions, the conditions that help us grow as adults so that we can be there in developmental relationships with one another and with young people. You know, they're the conditions that are created, aren't they? They're the conditions that we create by being intentional about it. They're the conditions we need. But we don't always have them. And I fully appreciate that. And, you know, the third section of this really is thinking about what's our role and contribution in the system so that we can create the conditions for ourselves, for colleagues and for young people to enable that amazing personal development to happen. And, you know, some of you might be familiar with the work of Matthew Barzun about constellation leadership. And I think it's a beautiful way of characterizing this. You know, it's he talks about the ability of us to see the star in everybody and then to connect those across space and across time and across your setting in order to unlock everyone's potential. And the root of this actually is that as the world is changing and becoming more complex, we need to step into all being powerful. You know, the idea that somebody else can solve the wicked problems that exist around us is a fallacy. You know, we're increasingly becoming more and more aware of the fact that it's going to be up to us. And if it's going to be up to us, then it's really by identifying everybody's strengths that we might have a fighting chance of doing that. So in this third section, I just want to think about our role and contribution in the system and how we continue to develop ourselves, but develop ourselves at a system level to think in systems in order to be there for young people. And I think one of the shifts in that for us is from kind of reflection, so from thinking deeply about stuff, which I'm sure is what we all do, to reflexivity. That is to thinking about ourselves within the systems that we inhabit. We usually separate these things. We usually kind of, you know, I know I spent most of my life kind of separating these things and not really seeing the systems that I existed within, and therefore assuming that it's somebody else's issue to create those conditions. And it's a kind of part of our growth and maturity and the evolution that Robert Keegan was talking about is to be able to see ourselves within those systems, whether it's the education system, the ecosystem, or systems of poverty, inequality and equity. And I love this phrase that really helped me to see this. You know, we're not stuck in traffic. You know, we are the traffic in the systems that we operate within. And so I wanted to kind of consider that really about what capacities do we need to operate at that sort of system level. And within that research that I shared, self-permission and having the courage and confidence to act from our deeper sense of purpose is really essential as a pastoral leader, because we're there modeling that for others, and it's that's potentially liberating for ourselves and others to be able to do that. So when we interviewed the Ashoka Fellows and Systems Leaders for the instrument, for the framework, something kept on coming through again and again and again, and that's the courage that these people had to tackle some of the most difficult issues, whether it was the mental health of young offenders in US prisons, whether it was young anorexia and eating disorders in girls and right across the States. There's a kind of lots of courage. And I think I'd just like to show you a short video about that I think is really inspiring. Have we got time for that film? Yeah. So let's just watch this short video from Nancy Klein, because I think it really characterizes that capacity of courage that we can usefully build in order to make our contribution at a system level.
dad and I...
Hold on, I need to... Okay. Just give us the thumbs up if that's all right, Phil.
Were on the floor of his study. We were going through his old papers. I was 17. And I remember spotting a fat paperclip whose rust was dusting the edges of a frayed sort of report of some kind. I reached over and got that, and I picked it up and I started to read. And then I started to cry. This was not a report. This was a speech that my father had written and delivered when he was 17. And it was a speech for his valedictorian address to his graduating class. And in it, he had called for complete equality for African Americans. And this was in 1920 in Tennessee. And I wondered how he could have had the courage to do that. And so I asked him, I said, Daddy, this speech, how did you ever get permission to do this, and weren't you scared? He looked at it and he said, oh, yeah. He said, well, honey, you know, I didn't ask for permission. He said, I just asked myself a question, which was, what is the most pressing issue facing my generation? And he said, I knew immediately. And he said, then I asked myself another question, which was, if I weren't afraid, what would I say about that issue in my speech? And he said, so I knew what I would write. And I did, and I stood up to deliver it in front of an audience of student body, faculty, board of trustees, community, parents, siblings. And I began to read, and then I looked up, and I noticed that everyone was standing. And then they all walked out. And he said, I was standing there looking out over an empty auditorium. And I said to myself, well, I guess I just need to be sure to do two things with my life. One, keep thinking for myself. And two, not get killed. And he handed it back and he said, I seem to have done both. My dad and I were on the floor of his...
Just feel free to put your response to that in the chat there, if you'd like to. I just find it really, really powerful every time I see it. You know, what's the most pressing issue facing my generation? If I weren't afraid, what would I say about that issue? If there was no fear, exactly. You know, as pastoral leaders, you know, we're faced with dilemmas all the time. You know, the system presents dilemmas to us all the time, you know, about exclusion, about provision, about equality, about equity. And we need to be brave, you know, we need to be able to hold our ground. And there's a former fellow of the university here, at the University of Worcester, John Westburn, who died this year, and he had a great phrase, actually. You know, he said the opposite of courage isn't cowardice, it's conformity. You know, how far are we able to challenge the system? How far are we able to know in our hearts what's right for young people and follow that through so that their voices get heard? And, you know, I guess for my part, and with Matt Silver as well on board, you know, we've started this organisation called Rethinking Leadership, Rethinking leadership is actually trying to help the English education system become more responsive, resilient, and relevant actually for young people. I mean, my own personal belief is that we're doing a real disservice to young people because we've got a curriculum that doesn't serve their needs, and won't enable them to function particularly well in a really complex world that they're facing. And a response at a system level is to step in to that, to work with others to solve this really wicked problem of how we develop leaders and people within the profession, the education system within the profession. So it might be worth reflecting, in your day-to-day lives, with all the amazing work you're doing with young people, how can you do that with a systems perspective? And finally, I guess I could just like to kind of summarize with 3 reframes, really. I think if we are going to have outstanding systems support for outstanding personal development and pastoral care, if we're going to really do that, I think it's essential to have a shift from qualifications to capabilities, to broaden the lens of the education system, the accountability system, and the assessment system to enable that to happen. Secondly, as we're developing ourselves and other people within the profession, then can we engineer a reframe from developing people to do the jobs they're doing to developing the people who are doing the job? Because if we're going to have outstanding personal development, then we need to be outstanding in the way in which we are developing ourselves and others personally. And thirdly, actually, if I had a magic wand to solve to ensure outstanding personal development and pastoral care, I'd shift our culture from a deficit-based one to an assets appreciative, positive, assets-based approach. And that, I think, if we could choose one thing to ensure that personal development in schools, then that would be the one thing I think that could be the difference, that makes the difference. It's been a real pleasure. I'll hand back to you, Phil.
No, thank you, Shaun. Thank you so much. That was so much to think about there, and so many ideas. I liked right from the beginning when you were talking about unlocking potential, and I think that's a really useful way of thinking about some of the pastoral work and the support that goes on in schools for young people, and really helps us to understand how we can make a difference through that pastoral work. Before we go to question time, has anybody got a question for Shaun? He is going to join us on the question time panel, but does anybody have a question for him before I move on to question time? Okay, let's do exactly that then. As I just said, Shaun's very kindly agreed to join us on the question time panel. And he's going to be joined with, let me introduce our other members of the panel tonight, Professor Noel Purdy, who's Director of Research and Scholarship at Stranmillis University College in Belfast, Dr. Mark Diakopoulos, who's the Assistant Professor, Department of Teaching and Leadership in the Pittsburgh State University in the United States of America, where I believe it's still the afternoon, Mark, so welcome. Dr. Karen Carter, who's Senior Lecturer in Early Childhood and Childhood at Sheffield Institute of Education at Sheffield Hallam University, and Victoria Rayner, who's the Director of Rayner Safeguarding Limited. Maria O'Neill, author and educationalist, was due to join us as well, but I can't see Maria on the call. So we'll if Maria is there, please wave at me, and I'll know you're there. So we've taken some questions from delegates and from members of NAPCE, and some suggestions from other people as well. I'm going to pick up on one which follows on straight from what something that Shaun said in the presentation, where he said the opposite of courage isn't cowardice, it's conformity. And the question is conformity the goal for pastoral leaders and pastoral systems in 21st century schools? Could be controversial, but perhaps let's go to Noel first in Ireland.
Thanks very much, Phil. Nice easy question to start off with then. Well, good evening, everybody. And yeah, a great question and a great presentation by Shaun as well. I mean, conformity is certainly not the goal for pastoral leaders and pastoral systems in the 21st century. And I mean, I would argue that effective pastoral leader is always challenging the system and challenging the sort of current prevailing approach to education, which is often very dominant, and certainly in the UK, in education, which is that marketized, commodified, sort of neoliberal approach to education, which is very much focused on attainment and grades and performance and all that kind of thing. So I think anybody who's a pastoral leader is naturally going to be challenging that approach to education. So, I mean, I can't see how any effective pastoral leader would be conforming to that approach to education or that understanding of education. So, I mean, certainly the pastoral leaders that I can think of who are most effective, and indeed the school leaders who I can think of who are most effective, are always challenging the system. They're always trying to push it to its very limits. They're always trying to push up to policymakers and say, look, you need to rethink this, we need to put the children first and so on. And so they're definitely non-conformists. That would be my starter for 10 on this one.
Thank you very much, Nola. I'm going to go to Victoria. What's your thoughts? Is conformity the goal for pastoral leaders and pastoral systems in 21st century schools?
I think it's a really interesting question, because I think whether or not it's the goal, or whether or not it's the direction of travel, is two very separate things. And I think that we see lots of schools perhaps jumping on initiatives and strategies and policies that look towards conformity in order to try and address some of the challenges that they're seeing come through with the, various challenges that they're seeing with the young people. But I would agree with Noel's last comment that pastoral leaders are some of the most non-conformist people in a school, and I say that with the greatest of affection and respect, because it is about fighting a system that doesn't work often. It's about fighting for the things that the children need, the children require in order to be able to be successful and unlock that potential. So I think that whereas some of the systems and policies around pastoral might be looking for conformity, I think the people that have got pastoral running through their veins will always buck against that, because the best thing for children is to fight the systems that don't work for them.
Okay, so we need brave pastoral leaders to fight the corner for our students. Karen, what's your thoughts on that question? Is conformity the goal for pastoral leaders and pastoral systems in 21st century schools?
Yeah, really interesting. I suppose for me, I'm obviously coming from the sort of beginning stages, I guess, from sort of nursery and when children start in school, so very, very early childhood, very much the early years. And I think those sort of leaders who are aware of what children need at that point. So when children are starting a nursery or starting a school, they need that sense of belonging, they need those relationships, they need those friendships, they need a play-based curriculum, which, friendship and relationships is integral to that play. So I think it's really important that those leaders sort of focus on a play-based curriculum and think about smaller class sizes, less testing, children have baseline assessment within weeks of starting in schools. So I think all of those things, pushing back on those and focusing on what we know and what's needed for children to just feel safe and feel that they belong in that space is really, really important.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. Mark, can I come to you? So what's your views on that question? I'll just remind you again, is conformity the goal for pastoral leaders and pastoral systems in the 21st century schools?
Well, I mean, concur with all the other people who have spoken on the panel. It really shouldn't be, and it isn't. However, the problem we have is our systems are pushing more and more for conformity. Over here in the States, we see legislatures and legislation that sort of position schools as they exist to support the economy. and they're not existing now to develop young people or develop citizens or develop, you know, individuals who can go and do amazing, you know, things, purely there to push workers into the economy somehow. And the same for our higher education system. So I think we're fighting a fight here where policy makers, decision makers well above us are, as Noel said, pushing a neoliberal agenda, and the ideals that they want would be for conformity. But we know that that is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing, and we can't support young people if we're just treating them like they're all the same. So it's a crucial question to keep asking, because more often than not, when we see policies or things put into place, they tend to be looking for compliance and conformity, and they want that in teachers too, which is a bit of a shame.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thank you very much. Shaun, I've left you till last, so you can get the last word on the question, but also to give you a bit of a break because you've been talking for most of the evening.
I appreciate that. And yeah, there's a consensus that's emerged on that question for sure. You know, I remember when I first landed in Liverpool in the mid-2000s, there was you know, all white, 96% white working class school this was, and you know, everybody, all the boys had short, dark hair, most of them, you know, and there was no there was like no individuality. It was just total conformity. There was social conformity, and we knew we were going somewhere with that school when they started to show themselves, when they started to grow their hair, when they started to push the uniform boundaries, you know, because fundamentally young people need to have an integrated sense of identity in order to progress and achieve. And you know, I just think it's really that culture of conformity is counterproductive to even the narrow success metrics that schools operate with at the moment. You know.
Thank you, Shaun. Thanks very much. I'm going to move us on to another question, and you'll probably see that I think I've probably picked the more interesting, controversial questions for the panel. The second question is there time to care in the pastoral work of schools in 2024? So is there time to care in the pastoral work of schools in 2024? And I think we'll go to the States first and find out what it's like out there and how they're getting it all right out in the States.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know whether you guys know, but most schools here have on-site counsellors, and those counsellors do a lot of the work we would consider pastoral work. They look after the social and emotional learning of students. They look at their career progression. They look at, you know, just they deal with day-to-day conflict and drama. And for a lot of your regular teachers here, traditionally, they would use the line of, I don't need to care because there's counsellors for that. And if a student has an issue, we send them to the counsellor, and that's not our problem. So, you know, it became that teachers' jobs were to teach curriculum and classes and content and not teach children. Now, since the pandemic, people have realised a little bit more that actually caring should come first, and, you know, before we do anything else. And in fact, you know, it's everyone's job to do to care first. And so, and we also know that if we don't have the conditions where learners can thrive, if they're not psychologically safe, if they're hungry, if they're, you know, in any kind of crisis, if there's issues at home, whatever's going on in the classroom doesn't matter anyway. And that's the key thing as well. You know, if the learning doesn't matter for our students, then we're wasting our time anyway. So I think there's a greater understanding here that we need to care more. And you hear people within schools and school leaders talk about, you know, building relationships, but they don't quite know how to do that. And we're having to see a huge culture shift within our classroom teachers to get out of this mindset of, I'm here to teach you content and I'm here to teach certain skills, and actually care about our young people. And that's starting. But the problem we have too is, you know, we're fighting against legislatures at state and local level that actively pass laws that stop you from caring for people. So right now we have, you know, anti-LGBTQIA and trans legislation that says, you know, if you're supporting a student who is undergoing any sort of identity shift and parents aren't involved and you don't inform parents, then, you know, that's tantamount to child abuse and stuff like that. So they're really, really trying to discourage teachers from doing the caring that needs to happen. So that's kind of disturbing right now. Again, we're at this real interesting crux of there's legislation saying that we shouldn't care. We know we should. We've got more people that are trying to and make that culture shift. But again, it's going to be very, very difficult when we're facing that political sort of zeitgeist.
That's really interesting, Mark, the challenges that you're facing there, but also perhaps a little bit of positivity there, that teachers are starting to see their role as being more about caring for the people in their care, and not just about content. There must be a lot of caring going on in early years. So let's go to Karen and see, just remind you the question, is there time to care in the pastoral work of schools in 2024, in your view?
Yeah, I've been having some conversations actually with head teachers and members of staff in school, because I've been doing some research and we've got like a little advisory group together, and the focus of that is around children's friendships and well-being. And interestingly, you know, there was a lot of conversations about you know, there's two strands really, saying we've got, on the one hand we've got the academic, and on the other hand we've got the well-being, and it's a fine balance trying to keep attention on both of those things, and you can't take your eye off of either of them. And I did kind of wonder, you know, perhaps more how we might integrate some of those well-being aspects into the curriculum, into the learning. And I think actually, since, you know, lots of people are saying, you know, and we can see with a sort of anecdotally, but also with some of the research and things that are coming out at the moment, that you know, the well-being and the mental health issues among children and young people were increasing before COVID, but obviously have been exacerbated since. So it's something I think in schools that they, you know, is very high on their agenda, and particularly in early years, and how we can support families really who've been affected by COVID, or the cost of living, or displacement from war situations, or displacement from trauma, and how families are, you know, really need that support and that help, and they need that time for somebody to care for the whole family sometimes, not just the children. But something else that came up around that was staff well-being, which is obviously something that Shaun was mentioning. And one particular head teacher was talking to the group about the fact that they felt that since COVID, particularly, that the staff it didn't seem like the staff were as resilient as they were before, and they were having to do, you know, a lot more to support their staff really, and take time to care for their staff, because they felt, you know, the toll of COVID, you know, had made a big difference on the staff.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Karen, and I think a theme that seems to be coming across quite a lot now, and I think schools are increasingly aware of the need to look after the staff, to enable them to look after the children. Shaun, any views on this question?
Yeah, I'd just add that, you know, in every school, in all your settings, and in every school I've been to, you know, there were teachers who absolutely care for the kids every day, and they're kind of doing it almost in some cases kind of in spite of the wider system rather than because of it. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. You know, the colleague that took over the school I ran in Liverpool, who was my deputy, but now she runs it, she gets the kids together beginning of every year, she was saying to me, and this continues the culture really, and she says to them, "I love you," you know, which is a powerful thing, isn't it? You know, to hear from your head teacher. You know, she says, like, "I love you in a different way to I love my own kids, but I do love you," and like, you know, that is deep care, you know, deep care, and that can be done, and you know, and the dividends that brings with it in terms of the buy-in of students is huge, because they're just asking, like any of us are in any relationship, "Are you there for me?" And when we are, they give back in spades, you know.
I think that's really interesting, Shaun, because really about the language, because the word care and love, if you tell people you care about them, sometimes people don't give it the status it should get. And I think also, if you say if you go into an assembly and say, "I really love you," then, you know, why not? But it could actually be seen as being not the appropriate thing to be saying. Let's go to Victoria, if we may. To remind you the question again: is there time to care in the pastoral work of schools in 2024?
Again, I think this is a really interesting question, because I think organically over certainly the last 10-15 years is that we have created roles within schools that are a purely pastoral role. So we've got family support workers, we've got behaviour support workers, we've got attendance support workers, and I think in doing so, by trying to put lots of spotlight on the importance of pastoral care in all settings, actually, whether this be primary, secondary, independent boarding, we have siloed away some of that work, actually. And I would like to see some more delegated responsibility back through the entire staff of a school, because we tend to now put children on lists and they will say, I'll speak to that person about that child because they're one of theirs. And actually, we need to go back, we need to stop saying they're one of theirs and start saying they're all ours. And actually, all of the teachers that I've worked with and I've spoken to, and we've done stakeholder feedback about what they feel about pastoral care, is that I want to do it, but I don't have the time, I don't have the space, and I don't now know what my role is with pastoral care, because there's all these people who do this job in this school for us. So I think in order for us to create more time and space, we need to recognise the role of every single member of staff in regards to pastoral, and not just those members of staff that might work in a pastoral team. So I think culturally across the sector, we need to break down that silo again and recognise that just like safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, so is pastoral care.
That's a really interesting comment to finish on, and there's a comment in the chat from Nikki. Thank you for that, reminding us that many of the people on the call are for independent schools. Victoria, do you think that's equally true for independent schools, what you've just said?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really privileged to visit a lot of state schools, independent schools, and review their pastoral care and their safeguarding, and it's the same. There's huge investment of time and money into pastoral care from maybe particular people with a responsibility or a team, but I actually think independent schools might do it a little bit better, from anecdotally, because of the tutoring relationships that they might have with particular children. I think the role of the tutor is key, and it's been lost into academics sometimes in some schools and in some settings, whereas actually we feel scared as school leaders to say, actually, some of that time in the morning or whenever you have your tutor period can just be about making sure that that child is okay, or building that relationship and making sure you're setting those children up for the day or removing barriers for the next day. So again, it's how do we use the role of every member of staff to create a really outstanding pastoral care system for children, and again, not just silo it down, but definitely I see pockets of really powerful work, but where I see that powerful work, it's where pastoral is a culture that runs through every element of school and not just sits within a team.
Thank you, and that's also a good response to a question from Sally. Thank you, Sally, for your question, which was, how about the vital role of the tutor? So I don't know whether you'd seen that in the chat, Victoria. If you didn't, that was excellent. You anticipated that. But perhaps, Noel, you can include that in your views as well. But the question is, there time to care in the pastoral work of schools in 2024? And if you could perhaps, if you've got any comments about Sally's question as well about the vital role of the tutor from the work you're doing in Northern Ireland with schools there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the real issue in this question, I think, is the one about time. Is there time? And time has to be an investment, I think, on the part of schools as well. And I agree completely with what Victoria said about every teacher having a pastoral responsibility. And I work in teacher education, and certainly that's what I tell all my student teachers, that everyone, it's not a role for one or two people in the school. Pastoral care is every teacher's responsibility. And Michael Marland, who's often seen as the father of pastoral care work in the UK, 40, 50 years ago, was writing about the fact that all teachers are teachers of their subject, but also pastoral teachers as well. And there's not this kind of dichotomy between the two, but they're both very much part and parcel of the same role as teachers. I was a form tutor. I was a boarding master as well, and I know a lot of independent schools have boarding departments. And I think there are particular challenges, but also particular pastoral opportunities in that kind of boarding environment and within schools and within the international sector as well. There's a very interesting chapter written in NAPCE's book, which Phil and I were co-editors of, published just a few months ago, written by Julianne Brown. He's worked for many years in the international school in Switzerland. And I would direct you towards that because it really talks about some of the challenges which often aren't written about within the independent sector, within the international boarding sector as well, of children who are often moving about between countries and often lack a sense of belonging and often lack stability in terms of relationships as well. And so there are particular challenges there. But even within day schools, the role of the year tutor or the form tutor, I think it's crucially important. I mean, that was a role that I had in my teaching career as well, and thoroughly enjoyed it. You know, it's a hugely rewarding role as well, and it's one where, when done effectively, can make a huge difference to a year group or a particular form class as well. But again, to go back to the question, it needs investment. Time is about money ultimately in schools, you know, and it's about whether, you know, that pastoral time with your form class is 5 minutes, which gives you time to mark the register and then the class are out the door, or whether it gives you 20 minutes or 25 minutes to actually get to know the class and do some activities and do some pastoral work with the group. But that's actually about a bigger strategic decision taken at the top level of the school, and I think actually that's really important. So form teachers can't do anything more than mark a register if they've only got 5 minutes, but if they're given time and training and resource, then it can be a really significant role.
Yeah, interesting comment from Shaun in response to that about being teachers of students, not of subjects. And I think that really sort of reinforces the idea that having form tutors, it's how you use that time, which is important, is very much several of the comments that have come through in the chat. So thank you for everybody that's put those comments in the chat. There's been a fair bit of conversation, discussion about the role of Ofsted and its future in the media, certainly in England and across probably other parts of the UK as well. So the next question, I think, comes with that sort of background. Is effective safeguarding the priority for judging the performance of pastoral leaders and pastoral systems in 21st century schools? Victoria, this is very much your area, so perhaps I'll come to you first, if I may.
Yeah, I mean, to be completely transparent, I absolutely don't believe that safeguarding personal development pastoral should be judged, you know, with one word or two words, effective or not effective. I think that it needs to be threaded through every part of school life. You know, we talk about safeguarding as a very operational tasks. So, you know, is there a policy in place? Show me your lists, show me your records, do all of these things, which happens during a school inspection. You know, and there has been movement over the last couple of years with the last framework around being able to triangulate that with student feedback and culture and things like that. But that needs to be far more developed. Quality assurance of safeguarding needs to be a culture. It needs to not be an event. You know, and we see so many people, I see so many people, so many leaders that say, we know safeguarding is fine because Ofsted came in and said it was effective. And that, you know, a one-day visit or a two-day visit with a one-word judgment is not a measure of effectiveness. The reason that we need to consistently measure the effectiveness of our pastoral care is to make sure that our children are getting high quality pastoral care, and we need to do that through a variety of different ways. We need to do that through constant feedback, constant questions, dynamic student feedback. We need to be, you know, constantly asking the community that, you know, everybody that sits within a school community, you know, how do things feel for you? You know, how are things going for you? We need to make sure that we're looking at attendance as an indicator of whether children feel safe to come to school. We need to be looking at things like analysis of behaviours, not just numbers of behaviours, not just numbers of suspensions or exclusions. It's about why are children behaving in a particular way, because that is good safeguarding. If we understand behaviour as a communication, we can understand where our risks lie within a school. So by boiling it all down to you're an effective pastoral leader because your safeguarding is effective, I think it's really reductive. And actually, I think that there needs to be lots and lots of thought around, well, what is safeguarding? Well, it's the prevention of harm to children, but it's also the prevention of emotional and psychological harm. It's the prevention of you know, children not meeting their full potential, so therefore we need to safeguard their futures and safeguard their potential. So I think that I'm waffling now because it really irritates me, that one word that one word Ofsted outcome. But I think that we need to be thinking much wider when we talk about safeguarding, because it's not about child protection, it's about all the ways in which we prevent that harm. And the same way that we've talked about threading pastoral care through everything, it's the same with safeguarding. We need to make sure that it's something that we do and not just say.
Well, the good news is, if the rumour is that the one-word judgments are going to go, so that's going to make us feel better. But you make a lot of other important points about culture and about pastoral leaders actually approach their work. Shaun, from your point of view, going into schools and looking at schools, is effective safeguarding the priority for judging the performance of pastoral leaders and pastoral systems?
I think Victoria's made some great points there in terms of safeguarding being a culture, not an event. And I think we've lost the plot a little bit with safeguarding, you know, because, you know, the administration of safeguarding was, you know, it's only a hygiene factor, you know, yet it gets all the attention. Actually, you know, maybe a better metric is, do students feel listened to, heard? Are they empowered to speak up for themselves? Because ultimately, you know, if they're in a safeguarding situation, that will determine whether they're safe or not whether somebody's filled out a list. Now, we have to do the list because they're the reductive outcomes of trying to put the other things in place, but it's a culture. And I see very few schools doing things like protective behaviours, for example, which builds a culture of safeguarding internally with adults and young people. You know, there could be more of that in the system, but I totally agree with you, Victoria, on that.
Do you think, Shaun, that's simply because staff haven't got enough time, or is it there needs to be a different way of thinking and a different way of approaching it?
I think one thing I've noticed, particularly in kind of looking at in the systems that we inhabit, it's difficult to see alternatives, and I think safeguarding is one of those. You know, I think we need to kind of just lay out everything, you know, on the table and kind of look at what we're actually trying to achieve with this. And, you know, I think if we did that and asked some rigorous questions, it would come back to the agency of young people. And if we could have that as a metric at schools, you know, how far are schools allowing young people's agency to flourish? You know, that's as much safeguarding, I think, as administration.
Thank you, Shaun. Karen, what are your thoughts on the question?
Yeah, I think I'd really sort of echo some of the things that have been said around child voice. And, you know, even very young children have, you know, the capability and the confidence to be able to talk about, you know, issues that affect them, or the curriculum or other things, you know, if they are sort of enabled and given that space to do so. I think the other thing for me, thinking particularly about early years and thinking about what Victoria was saying about, you know, the cultural aspect, was, you know, the voice of parents as well within that, and developing that culture. And I think in a lot of early years and primary school context, that partnership with parents was kind of a bit eroded by COVID, where parents couldn't come in the mornings and there couldn't be home visits. And I think, you know, the schools and the settings that I speak to now, who've managed to get the home visits back established so that they're going to visit children before in their homes before they start nursery, so they get to know the families, you know, breaking down those barriers, you know, developing those trusting relationships with parents. And also in the morning when you know, parents can come into school and they feel welcomed into school, and, you know, they can pass on information. You know, they might be saying, you know, so-and-so didn't sleep very well last night, or this has happened this morning, we've not had a good morning. You know, passing on some of those little bits of information that can really make a difference to the child's day if the adults know about what's gone on beforehand. So I think some of those things for me around understanding family circumstances, understanding what might have be happening in a child's life in order to sort of empathise and also to support children is really important.
Thank you, Karen. Lots of nods while you were speaking there, so thank you for that. And thank you also to people for comments in the chat as well. Slightly different in Ireland, Noel, perhaps in terms of priorities, and the curriculum's different. What would be your views on that question? Is effective safeguarding the priority for judging the performance of pastoral leaders and pastoral systems in 21st century schools?
Yeah, well, we are looking at the events in England with horror, probably, to be honest. I mean, I'm reading Nicky's comment here about Ruth Perry's death last year, and the absolute tragedy of that. And I just hope and pray that that might be a tipping point for Ofsted and for how inspection is done in England. Thankfully, the system is different in Northern Ireland. But we still have this kind of reductive practice of trying to summarise an entire school with one or two words, and you know, we need to get past that. And I'm not suggesting that we don't need some form of accountability for public money being spent well and for children's education and so on and so forth. But we need to rethink how we do accountability, I think, and we need to develop an ethical, morally sound accountability. And that needs to extend to how inspection is done as well, because at the moment it's clearly unethical and it's immoral what's happening. And those are strong words, but it's not working. And inspection and accountability doesn't have to be that way. It's been like that for a long time, you know, clearly in England, but it doesn't have to be that way. And there are other parts of the UK, Scotland, for instance, which is further along the road in terms of an inspection system which is supportive of schools rather than seeking to judge and condemn schools. And we need to get, you know, make sure that our inspection system right across the UK is supportive and constructive and helping schools and teachers to do the job more effectively. So, you know, that's the bigger picture of where we are in terms of judging schools. And but at the moment, it's all wrong, I'm afraid, and it needs a significant rethink. And I'm just hoping that Ruth Perry's death a few months ago may have finally woken up our policymakers and inspectors to rethinking how they do inspection, because it can't go on like this.
Thank you, Noel. Again, some great comments coming in the chat. Thank you very much. Keep them coming. What about the States, Mark? Is safeguarding the priority for judging school leaders there?
Absolutely not. It's like the least thing anyone thinks about here. So the way things happen in the public sector, in public education, is that test scores are reported and school districts are measured according to the standardized test scores that students earn, and graduation rates. They're the metrics that are looked at. What schools decide to do inside that, nobody asks questions. And so that's down to the individual school leaders, teachers, caregivers within schools to look at safeguarding. I mean, there's policies within districts and stuff like that, but unless there's a dramatic issue, nobody ever asks questions. And of course, we're in a culture where you can send your kid to school and they're not going to come home because they might have been shot. So, you know, one of the solutions we have for that here is we'll put more police in schools, and that doesn't help if you're marginalized, it doesn't make people feel safe. So, you know, we're going about things very much the wrong way. And one of the, you know, Ofsted's a mess out there, obviously, and it's poorly done. But having some sort of system that looks at things other than just scores and metrics and comes out with more than one line, is actually a little bit more humane than what we have here. And it's interesting, Wendy just said in that, you know, homeschool students sort of drop through the cracks. Same thing here. If you're homeschooled, no one's checking on you. If you're in the private sector, in what we would term of independent schools and religious schools, no one's checking on those either. There's no reporting at all. So the only place where there's any reporting happens in our public schools, in our you know, regular schools, and even then they're not looking at the safeguarding or the care of the learners at all. So in a way, you've got a really messy system with Ofsted, but it's a system that, if it's worked properly and reformed properly and actually looks at the right things, could do a lot of good if it's done correctly. And it's a shame, because I talk to people here and I say, look, you know, there's an inspectorate in England. They actually come in and they spend a bit of time in schools and they talk to people and they ask questions other than what the school's like, you know, and people here are blown away by that, you know, because they see there's a potential to really get and look at some of the nuances and complexities of schools and have an improvement mindset. And unfortunately, I think politically, more than anything, the last sort of 12, 13, 14 years, Ofsted's become more of a, you know, a box checking and rating system than a looking for improvement, which is a shame. Yeah, so we don't have anything like that here, and we need something, but we need it to be done right. And my concern is that Ofsted won't change in England, and will follow more and more of our metrics-based system here. And as long as you're checking the right boxes, you'll be okay.
That's interesting, Mark. You know, it's interesting to know how different it is there, and we get used to pulling our own system to pieces. But it's also good to. I think the key thing you said there is whatever happens, it needs to be appropriate. It needs to work. So thank you for that. I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in. So members of the panel, if you can be really quite brief in your response to this question, because we're running out of time. But the question is what would be your main wish for pastoral care in schools in the future? So I'm going to try and pin you down to one wish. Shaun, you were our guest speaker this evening, so I'm going to come to you first and give you first shout on that one.
I already said it actually in the presentation, which is that a shift from deficits to assets, that would make such a big difference culturally and in terms of policy.
Thank you, Shaun. That's why I came to you first, because I knew you got the answer straight away. Noel, if I come to you.
Yeah, well, actually, very similar to that, probably. I think education needs to be seen as investment rather than expenditure. And I think when you see something as an investment, then it shifts your entire thinking about how money is being spent. So education is investment rather than expenditure. Investment in the future rather than expenditure in the present.
Thank you, Noel. Really, really good, quick answer there. I like that one. Thank you. Thank you very much. If we go to Karen.
I would probably say a system that focuses on embedding positive relationships and making that the core of, developing a culture of real positive relationships.
Thank you, Karen. Same question, Mark. What would be your wish for pastoral care, both sides of the pond?
Okay, I think two things really. One, and I know it's supposed to be one, but two things. One is to make sure education doesn't exist to support the economy and serve the economy. The economy serves us, and it would be the one way to look at it. And then the second thing is to get out of this mindset of teaching for content. We need to be teaching for citizenship. What does it mean to be a contributing, engaged, active citizen in the 21st century? And we don't ask that question enough. And we're looking for compliance and box checking and people to do what they're told, rather than people who are going to make positive change and make from themselves and in their own small communities and beyond. So if we can empower our young learners to be engaged citizens from the day they walk into school, that would be such a difference maker.
Thanks, Mark. As you're joining us from so far away, I'll let you have two, even though the question was one. Victoria, your wish.
I think that we have to have pastoral centric systems in place in schools, particularly around induction of new staff. We spend a lot of time inducting staff on how to put a detention on, how to chase attendance, how to do all of the negative stuff, and I'd like to see a real shift in that, and have the silos broken down with pastoral, and that pastoral becomes everybody's responsibility, not just the pastoral team.
Excellent answer, and I think that echoes quite a few comments that have been in the chat this evening as well. So some really interesting ideas there. I'm going to try and share screen if it'll let me do that. Is that actually sharing? Can't see. I've lost everybody.
Yeah, it is. It's sharing, Phil.
Okay, excellent. So if I go to slideshow and beginning, hopefully that will, yeah, brilliant. Okay, yeah, it just left to me really to say a big, huge thank you on behalf of NAPCE. First of all, to our guest speaker, Shaun. Please can I also thank Mark, Victoria, Noel, Shaun and Karen for being on the panel, and for all members of the audience tonight who've joined in with your comments and your questions. I hope you all continue to engage with NAPCE and support the work of the charity as we look to promote the importance of pastoral care and supporting the personal development of children and young people as part of their learning experience. So if I talk about some of our future events, most importantly, the nominations are open now for the National Awards for Pastoral Care in Education. You can find details about them at the NAPCE website, which is www.napce.org.uk. And the closing date, as it says there on screen, is the 19th of April, so not too long to go. The good news is it's excellent value because it's free to make a nomination, and there are prizes, both financial prizes and plaques for the winners. So it's a real chance to recognise people who are making a good contribution to your work in pastoral care in your schools, organisations, and I'm very pleased to see a number of winners and finalists from last year have been on this event this evening, so thank you for that. Friday the 11th of October is the NAPCE annual conference, and the title is going to be Sharing Good Practice in Pastoral Care and Education, so please look out for information about that. It will be taking place at the Worcestershire Cricket Ground in the lovely city of Worcester, and on that evening it will be the grand presentation event for the National Awards for Pastoral Care and Education, once again at the same venue, and there are a couple of people in the picture there who've been with us this evening, and I think they'd agree it was a really enjoyable event last year, and a great chance to recognise the good work and a good practice that's taking place, and a chance to meet and network with other people. So please keep engaged with NAPCE. We have a monthly newsletter. We have a journal which is very respected across the world, Pastoral Care and Education. Opportunities to really get involved as a member, both either as an individual or as a group organisation. That's the contact there. If you contact us on admin@napce.org.uk, the website www.napce.org.uk, X or Twitter handle is NAPCE1, and please look out for future events by looking on Eventbrite on the NAPCE page there. So a big thank you to everybody for what I think has been a really stimulating and interesting event this evening, and I hope you've all found it useful, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thank you, enjoy the rest of your evening, and on behalf of NAPCE, thank you for being here tonight, and I look forward to seeing you at future NAPCE events. Bye bye everybody.
Thank you, bye.
I see you've got Ashley.
Yeah, Ashley's been very good till now. He's been very good.
Well done, Phil. That was lots of engagement.
Yeah, no, thank you, Shaun. That was absolutely perfect. The presentation, lots to think about for what was quite a varied audience, and yeah, lots of engagement, and yeah, great. Really pleased.
Yeah, good stuff. Nice doggy.
He's not always that well behaved. Ashley's totally confused. Actually, you can probably hear me. He doesn't know where I am.
Yeah.
He knows where his bread's buttered, doesn't he? Amazing. Right, I'll see you. Just making sure it's all right. Brilliant. Nice to see you. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Good boy.